Guilty as charged, Malaysia's former Prime Minister Najib Razak is convicted over his role in the 1MDB corruption scandal.
Feeling stress and fatigue? You are not alone, as the COVID-19 pandemic has changed the way we live and do things.
And raising the flag for Singapore's 55th birthday, NDP 2020 will feature a special ceremony this year.
Good evening, it's 5:30 p.m. here in Singapore. You're watching The Big Story, coming to you live from the Straits Times newsroom. I'm Haryanto Diman.
And I'm Olivia Quay. You can, of course, subscribe to the Straits Times channel so you never miss a single episode.
Najib Razak has been found guilty of all 7 charges in his first of 5 trials linked to the 1MDB scandal. Today's verdict relates to the transfer of 42 million ringgit or 13.6 million Singapore dollars from SRC International, a former unit of 1MDB, into his bank accounts when he was Prime Minister of Malaysia.
Convicted on 1 count of abuse of power, 3 counts of criminal breach of trust and 3 counts of money laundering, each carries a prison sentence of up to 15 to 20 years. Najib's legal battles are far from over. He faces a further 35 charges in another 4 trials related to 1MDB, the state-owned wealth fund he set up in 2009 with the help of Joe Low, the fugitive financier.
The case has attracted huge public and international interest. Hundreds of Najib's supporters turned out this morning shouting "Long live Najib" as the former PM arrived in court.
The Straits Times' Malaysia Bureau Chief Shannon Teoh joins us now from Kuala Lumpur. Shannon, first of all, can you tell us more about what happened in the courtroom or even around the High Court?
Well, it was pretty colourful. Crowds had gathered from very early in the morning as the sun was coming up, some might say. Plenty of supporters, chanting their support for Najib. And even when the when the verdict came out and news started to spread around the High Court, people who were really sad. I think there were tears. There were some supporters claiming that the court had got it all wrong. The SRC International was actually a charity organization. It was helping widows and single mothers and orphans and things like that. So that you'd say that based on the reaction, there is still a lot of support for Najib despite the verdict.
So what's next, Shannon? We know Najib's legal team is intending to appeal.
Well, based on the fact that they've consistently said that he's innocent, and they can appeal this to the Court of Appeals and beyond that to the Federal Court if they desire. What happens is that basically he remains an MP as long as he appeals. So he will still be able to sit in Parliament. He will still be part of the 222 MPs that go to Parliament. But if an election happens before his appeal is successful, that means he cannot contest in the election. So if the Prime Minister, if Perikatan Nasional decide to go to the polls before an appeal is disposed of, it means that Najib cannot defend his seat, which also means that for some who were concerned or they held out some hope that Najib might return as Prime Minister, that's not going to happen if polls are held soon, and we expect it to be held within the next 9 months, maybe.
Right. Well, this is just the first of 5 court cases Najib is facing, and the amounts involved here are relatively small compared with those in his second and most significant trial, which centers on allegations that he illicitly obtained over $500 million. But Shannon, does today's verdict give any indication on how the next trial will play out?
Well, I think if you were to look at each trial very technically and into the details, you'll find that this is the one that people were saying is more open and shut than the rest. The rest are a bit more convoluted. The evidence isn't so straightforward. This one, the prosecution was the most confident about. If you speak to senior lawyers, they say that if they couldn't make this case stick, it's going to be very difficult for the rest. So they've gotten this one out of the way. They've managed to get their guilty verdicts. However, it does not really mean that there'll be guilty verdicts rolling all the way through to the rest of the charges. Those will still have to be decided on merit. A lot of them are still ongoing, very early stages. We will have to see. But this was really the case that they could really pin him on. This was the one where they had the strongest evidence. So if anything, if this had come out with not guilty, then you might expect Najib to actually come out not guilty for everything. But we've got a guilty verdict for this, so the rest are still in play.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Shannon, for that information. We'll be checking in as this case develops, or rather the 5 cases develops. And we've been speaking to our Malaysia Bureau Chief, Shannon Teoh.
On to the latest COVID-19 situation here. 359 new cases were confirmed today, taking our total to over 51,100. Only one community case was confirmed, a work pass holder.
Today's count also includes 2 imported cases who had been placed on stay-home notices upon arriving in Singapore. Migrant workers living in dormitories made up the remaining cases, and more details will be shared later tonight.
Wearing masks and social distancing have become part of daily life in the COVID-19 pandemic. But 6 months on, has fatigue hit home?
Good question. Well, multimedia journalist Renee Poh hit the streets to find out.
It's been half a year since COVID-19 hit Singapore, where wearing masks and maintaining social distancing have become the new normal. Community cases have stayed low in phase 2, and people have started venturing out once again. But as life returns to normal, have we become tired of following the rules? In recent weeks, crowds of people have been spotted at beaches, parks, and popular night spots like Holland Village, where safe distancing rules were not kept to. Both businesses and individuals have been fined for not adhering to the measures. This was also observed by people we spoke to.
I always see people going out, and there are too many gatherings, social gatherings, which they shouldn't have, basically. Normally I see, if I go to, let's say, Jurong East or West, right, the parks, I always see like barbecues. Yeah, they should be more cautious and less people. Normally I see more than 5, so it's a bit crazy.
They gather together, they just like in coffee shops, they spend extended period of time after eating their food, but they are still gathering, they're still talking. I can see people are actually, letting their guard down.
I still see places are packed with people, so I think they still, as a human being, I think they still need to go out and enjoy.
Contrary to what they saw, many said they did not go out unnecessarily and limited contact with their social groups.
Go out only probably for work and for groceries, and I need to for some important catch-up as well. Making more important decisions and need help from friends.
So far now, we don't really do social gatherings with our family members. Even during Hari Raya Haji, I told my husband I'm still scared to go out and meet other people, so it's best that we just stay home.
I only go out to go to school. Anything other than that, I stay at home. On a daily basis, I also don't really meet my friends. So even with the current situation, all the more shouldn't do that.
If they went out, they made sure to take necessary precautions.
We won't be like, 2 or 3 or 4 to 5 family members gather at the same house. That also defeats the purpose. So we tend to have a more scheduled timetable, whose family is time to visit my parents, and then who can gather together.
现在出去哪里要消毒咯，洗手咯，然后distancing 啦。当然我们习惯了啊，出门一定要戴 mask 才可以出门啊。
As Singaporeans go about their daily lives, many are mindful that we are still in a global pandemic, at least for some time to come.
Professor David Chan, Director of the Behavioural Sciences Institute at Singapore Management University, joins us now to further discuss this concept of COVID fatigue. Prof Chan is also an author of a new book, Combating a Crisis, about the psychology of Singapore's response to COVID-19. Prof, some people are beginning to use the term COVID fatigue. Is it a scientific concept in psychology, or what is COVID fatigue really?
That is referring to the general population, public at large like you and me. And because of the circuit breaker, or in some countries they call it lockdown, and even when you get out of the circuit breaker or lockdowns, there are still several restrictive movements. And the idea here is really about constraint fatigue. Right? We are being constrained and we feel fatigued. And what are the constraints? There are constraints on your freedom of movement. There are constraints on your freedom of choices, because there are certain things that you can choose to do, but there are certain things that you can't do. For example, I have to wear my mask. I cannot say, let's not wear the mask. and I have to social distance. And when I go to a restaurant, I can sit here but not there because there's a cross and so on. And when I go out with friends, I'm limited to a group of 5 in the case of Singapore's phase 2 right now. So these are constraints. So when we say COVID fatigue, I think you are referring to what general public may feel in terms of the constraints on our behaviors, on our choices, and their implications. And we can use scientific psychology and other research to look at the implications of this fatigue.
Right. So, from what you've observed in phase 2, how would you describe our situation with regards to public attitudes and behaviors?
Well, right now we are already several weeks into phase 2. I think when we get out of the circuit breaker right into phase 1 and we are beginning into phase 2, I would characterize the members of public attitude or behaviors as ones of vigilance, because you begin to transit from one phase to another. You begin to figure out, what am I supposed to do, especially if you're an SME holding a business. But even if you're an organization, can I go to work? What must I do? And so on. Now, the problem, maybe not the problem, but the issue is that now that we are several weeks into phase 2, we kind of habituate. You kind of get normalized. You roughly know what you can do and cannot do, and you just live the life that you want to live. Now, if you watch TV or you read newspaper every day, you still know that actually the global situation is pretty bad, right? In fact, within a short time, we go up into 16 million and so on. And that means that even if we were to seal off the border, which we can't seal off indefinitely, it is quite possible for us to have new waves of infection. So the issue about attitudes and experiences and behavior is whether we are entering into a habituate situation where you feel actually a bit of complacency, and that's quite dangerous.
Prof, on that note of habituating and like you said, normalizing, we still see some individuals not adhering to safe distancing practices then. Perhaps some are also getting restless or tired from having to work from home for a few months now. Could it be that we are fatigued from following rules as there is no end in sight for phase 2, or even the fact that, just the fight against COVID-19 in general?
I think we need to differentiate two things. One is the fatigue, the general difficult psychological condition that you feel because you are stuck at home, you cannot go to office, you are working from home, and you have certain restraints about wearing masks, and so on. So you feel certain negative emotions, and these translate into negative attitudes and experiences. And the question then is how to deal with this difficulty. But I think you are alluding to something else, and that is the fact that there are people who are not following rules. And I would say, broadly speaking, at the risk of simplifying, there are two types. One is that sometimes you get a little bit agitated, you take out your mask longer than you should when you're not eating. Sometimes when you go out with friends, you forgot, a friend come by and you end up with a table of 6 and so on for a short while. Now, those are not following rules in the strictest sense of the word, but in a sense, those are ad hoc kind of violations, which sometimes we got to be a bit I wouldn't say lenient, but got to be a bit understanding. But there are the second type, which we should be much more concerned. And those you see where you have large groups of people gathered at the East Coast Park. Well, you may be going out in a family of friends of 5 or less, but then very near you, there's another group of 5 or less. And then there's another group of 5 and so on. So you ended up actually mixing with a large group of people. And most people, if you notice, some of them are not wearing masks. And when you are in the hot sun, you sweat, you perspire, you talk. And those are the issues that we should be much more concerned. It is not just complacency. There's a false sense of security to act as if that it will never happen to me. And that is something that we, the government, the authorities, and all of us got to be a bit more careful.
Thank you for your insights, Prof. Chan. We were speaking to Professor David Chan, who is the Director of the Behavioural Sciences Institute at SMU. Also in the local headlines, according to a parliament statement today, as the official leader of the opposition, Workers' Party Chief Pritam Singh will be given certain parliamentary privileges like the right of first response among MPs. He will also have the right to ask the lead question to ministers on policies, bills and motions subject to existing speaking conventions, as well as receive confidential briefings by the government on select matters of national security and external relations, and in the event of national crisis or emergency. Mr. Singh will also have more time for his speeches equivalent to that given to political office holders. He and House Speaker Tan Chuan Jin met over lunch earlier today to discuss this role.
The number of marriages in 2019 hit a new 9-year low with slightly more than 25,400 registered. Both civil and Muslim marriages dipped last year, while the proportion of inter-ethnic marriages rose to 22.9. Over 7,600 marriages ended in a divorce or annulment last year, an increase of 3.8% from 2018.
Meanwhile, around 39,200 births were registered last year. This defying expectations as it was an increase of 0.6% from 2018, which also saw an 8-year low. More people also died last year by 0.8% to over 21,400. An aging population means deaths have been on an upward trajectory since at least 2010.
And according to updated guidelines from the Singapore Tourism Board, local walking, cycling and kayaking tours are now allowed to accommodate 10 participants, double the previous limit. But as 5 remains the current limit for public gatherings, groups that exceed this must be split into 2 with no intermingling. Other guidelines include limiting tours to a maximum of 8 hours and using portable audio systems with individual headsets to communicate with participants. Transport capacity must also be capped at 50 people.
A Maserati driver whose car dragged a police officer for more than 100 meters along Bedok Reservoir Road back in 2017 was sentenced today to 4 years and 7 months jail with a lifetime driving ban. Lee Cheng Yen was also ordered to pay a fine of $3,700. Last December, Lee was found guilty of voluntarily causing grievous hurt to the policeman, Staff Sergeant Khairul Anwar Abdul Kahar. Lee has 59 other pending charges related to matters including unlawful gambling activities. These will be dealt with at a later date.
Good evening, I'm Dylan Ang. Let's take a look at the global headlines. New Zealand has suspended its extradition treaty with Hong Kong following China's passing of the national security law for the territory. Foreign Affairs Minister Winston Peters said that New Zealand can no longer trust that Hong Kong's criminal justice system is sufficiently independent from China. Australia, Canada and the UK all suspended extradition treaties with Hong Kong earlier this month, with the US also ending preferential economic treatment. Moderna and Pfizer launched 2 30,000 subject trials of COVID-19 vaccines that could clear the way for regulatory approval and widespread use by the end of the year. Globally, more than 150 vaccine candidates are in various stages of development, with some 24 prospects already conducting human testing. Vietnam is evacuating 80,000 people, mostly local tourists, from the central tourism hotspot of Da Nang after 3 residents tested positive for the coronavirus over the weekend. The evacuation will take at least 4 days, with domestic airlines operating approximately 100 flights daily to 11 Vietnamese cities. Vietnam is back on high alert after it confirmed its first community infection since April on Saturday and another 3 cases on Sunday, all in or around Da Nang. And those are the headlines around the world. It's back to you guys in the studio.
Thank you, Dylan. Well, back home, the plan for this year's National Day celebration is beginning to take shape with more details revealed.
NDP 2020's morning segment will feature nationwide flag-raising ceremonies accompanied by Singaporeans singing the national anthem together. Multimedia journalist Kimberly Zhao has more.
In light of the ongoing pandemic, NDP 2020's morning parade will take the celebrations to the heartlands. A key highlight is the anthem moment. Singaporeans will be rallied to sing the national anthem together from their homes.
The anthem moment we feel is extremely significant because it represents a moment of unity for the entire country to come together in spite of the challenges that we face, to look to the future full of hope and optimism.
The anthem moment will take place at 10:30 a.m. on August 9th, signalled by the sounding of the public warning system. Flag-raising ceremonies will take place concurrently at 8 locations across the island, including the Padang.
I feel proud and honoured to be able to be part of NDP this year to raise the flag, as it is my very first time. I think it's meaningful to be part of a large-scale national event during my national service. Knowing that the morning parade will be on live telecast for the entire nation, I definitely feel nervous as the days draw closer.
President Madam Halimah Yacob and Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong are amongst those who will be in attendance at the Padang. The other locations are Changi Airport, Enabling Village in Redhill, Lifelong Learning Institute at Paya Lebar, the National Centre for Infectious Diseases, North Vista Secondary School, NTUC FairPrice Hub at Joo Koon, and Kampong Admiralty. The flag raising at these 8 sites will be broadcast live on free-to-air channels starting from 10:20 in the morning. The morning celebrations will also involve a maritime sail past, mobile columns and the Red Lions in the heartlands, as well as fighter jet and state flag flypasts.
Well, those are our top stories, and you can visit straitstimes.com for more news and videos, and subscribe to our YouTube channel by hitting the red button below.
Once again, I'm Haryanto Diman with Olivia Quay. Join us tomorrow for more stories on A Big Story.